in Sao Paulo, Brazil. Ayrton Senna da Silva, or known to us as Ayrton Senna, was one of, if not Formula One's greatest ever driver. He grew up loving motor racing and went into Formula One in 1984 following a successful campaign in British F3. Martin Brundle, his rival for the championship at that time, said that Senna had a certain style which made you pick. So what happened, how it worked was Senna basically, if you were going to go for a move on him, he would usually make you choose whether to go for a risky move and potentially crash or to back out of it. And that is how Senna won the title, not only because he was an extremely fast driver, but because he won races from using that defensive style. And but there was an example where it was dangerous, and that was when Brundle went over the top of Senna, and they both retired from the race. But he had very quick pace and won the British Formula 3 title by quite a big margin from Brundle. And he attracted the attention of Frank Williams, Ron Dennis, and Ted Tolman. He did with all three of them, and in the end, he had to go with Tolman because Williams and McLaren didn't offer him deals for the following season of 1984, and they offered him future deals. And Senna drove for Tolman in 1984. Now, the TG184, I think that was the name of the car, I'm not completely sure on that, was not a fast car. It wasn't even good enough to get points. But Senna dragged the car to the podium, not once, not twice, but 3 times, as he took his first ever podium in only his 6th F1 race. Now, it may not sound impressive, Kevin Magnussen got a podium in his first F1 race, but I put 3 factors into why this was one of, if not the greatest Formula 1 drive of all time. 1, the car he was driving was hardly good enough to get points. 2, it was in torrential wet conditions. 3, he came from 13th to 2nd, and I'll just add another one in there just because, I want to add the facts. It was at Monaco. And Senna finished 2nd and almost won the race in a car which should not have been anywhere near the podium. But despite this, he still took another 2 podiums, and he proved it wasn't a fluke. He finished tied 8th in the championship with Nigel Mansell, who was moving to Williams, which left a gap open at Lotus for Senna to go into, and he did. He drove for Lotus from 1985 to 1987, and in those 3 years, he showed in one specific performance, maybe 2 specific performances, why he was so good. In one of them, Nigel Mansell was catching up to him rapidly, and he held on to victory by 14 thousandths of a second, which is, I think, the closest gap in F1 history. And in the other case that I mentioned, he won the Portuguese Grand Prix in torrential wet conditions. And McLaren caught attention of this. He finished top 4 in the championship in all 3 of those years. Meanwhile, his teammates in all of those years couldn't match him. Elio De Angelis finished 5th, just behind him, and Johnny Dumfries and Satoru Nakajima struggled to get points. But in 1988, McLaren signed Senna to the team to drive alongside Alain Prost, who had won the race that I already mentioned in Monaco. And in 1988, Senna showed more and more why he was such a good driver. And at the finale in Suzuka, he won the title off of merit, and that was difficult to see in those days because there was so many incidents and accidents that happened which stopped the driver from winning a title. And in that specific year, Senna was just better than Prost, full stop. And Senna won the championship after stalling at the start, and he fell back to mid-pack, and he had to work his way up the field and ended up winning the race in the end. And that was enough for him to win the title. And in 1989, the rivalry between Prost and Senna hit new levels, but not in a good way for Ron Dennis, who was obviously McLaren team boss at the time. As in San Marino, Senna and Prost had an agreement of whoever led into turn one won the race, but the problem was there was 2 starts to the race, because there was a crash at the first corner right at the start of the race, which resulted in two starts. And as a result, they argued a lot about it, because Senna had the lead at the first restart in the first corner, but Prost had the second restart lead heading to the first corner, and they never really recovered from this dispute, and they collided at the finale in Suzuka, and Senna was he was probably raging with Prost. It wasn't even Senna's fault, and yet he got disqualified from the race. Because Prost turned into Senna when Senna was going for a move, and Prost had had enough of him, publicly said that, and moved to Ferrari for the following season, and Senna was dominant in 1991, but in 1990 it was really close between Prost and Senna, because it went right down to the wire. In fact, heading into the first corner at Japan, the third season in a row that the title had been decided at Japan, but instead of it being the last corner that they collided at, it was the first corner, and instead of it being Prost that mitigated it, it was Senna that mitigated it, when Senna turned into Prost, and basically just got his revenge. And in 1990, Senna won the title because of their collision. And Jackie Stewart interviewed Senna after the race and said, "You, in the last 48 months, have had more crashes than any other world champions combined, you and Prost. Why is that? 48 months, sorry, not hours. Why did I say hours? In the last 48 months, you and Prost have had more collisions than any other world champion combined. Why is this the case?" And he said, "I'm amazed you ask a question like this, Stuart, because you know what it's like. If you go for a gap that no longer exists, you're no longer a racing driver, because we are competing to win. And I don't come fifth for third, second. I am designed to win." And this quote aged brilliantly, because he would win his... Well, it aged badly in a way, because he actually won the title the following year. He aged brilliantly, actually. He dominated. In 1991 at Adelaide, he won by absolutely miles from anyone else. And proved why he was the master. The Rainmaster. Senna won the title in 1991 and showed yet again his wet weather prowess at the 1991 Australian Grand Prix, when he was basically just racing to survive. And speaking of surviving, in the following season in 1992, Senna saved Eric Koolmaas's life, but I'll talk about that in a minute. I'm just reminding myself of that. And Senna won the title that year from Nigel Mansell, and it was a pretty dominant year for him. For Senna, it was basically Senna in his prime. But the next 2 years, McLaren didn't have a quick car compared to Williams, who was really making up steps with their active suspension idea. And in 92, Senna only took a couple of wins, but showed 2 signs of how good he was. One of them was the 1992 Monaco Grand Prix, when Nigel Mansell, who was leading the race by quite some margin, got a puncture and fell behind Senna, because he had to pit. And Senna was leading the race after this, and Mansell caught up to him very quickly on the new tyres, and because he had active suspension, McLaren and Senna didn't. But Senna held him off for 3-4 laps, despite Mansell being on less fuel, newer tyres, and to put it simply, in a better car. And Senna held him off and won the race. And the other example of Senna's true icon status was in Spa, when Eric Koolmaas crashed at Blanchimont, and Senna saved his life. Because Comas crashed so heavily, he was knocked unconscious and still had his foot on the pedal. And as a result, Senna was driving past and got out of his car and made sure that Comas's foot wasn't on the accelerator, because if it was on the accelerator for much longer, the car would have caught fire and the engine would have overheated. And Comas and Sid Watkins credited Senna for saving Comas's life. And again, Senna's true colours of being sportsmanlike, sort of, and being incredibly fast showed that day. But in '93, Senna returned to form, and yet again, it was against Prost, who had joined Williams because Mansell had retired from Formula One and moved to America to compete in an American racing series called Kart, which is basically like F1 but in America. And Senna battled throughout the year with the two Williams cars of Alain Prost and Damon Hill, and even the Benetton of a young German who would go on to basically be the replacement for Senna in terms of icon status in Michael Schumacher. And in '93, Senna put in most likely his best ever performance at Donington in the wet, when he went from 6th to 1st in one lap. He passed Karl Wendlinger, his teammate Michael Andretti, Alain Prost, Damon Hill, and Michael Schumacher all in one lap. And he ended up winning the race by almost a lap from anyone else. He lapped everyone except Damon Hill, who finished second, and even then he was close to lapping him. And not only was it showing how good McLaren's strategy was, because they pitted onto dries and wets at the right time, but it showed how good Senna was. Even in a crap car, he could still perform brilliantly. Meanwhile, his teammate was struggling to get in the points. And Senna's season in '93 was incredible, and he saw the talent of the Williams team and thought, that's my next step. That is where I will win my 4th title, and that's where I'll catch up with Alain. So at the end of '93, he announced he was moving to Williams, and in his last ever race, with McLaren, he actually won ahead of Prost and Hill. And that was really fitting, because Hill would be his future teammate and Prost was his past teammate. And Senna and Prost were on the podium together for one final time, because that would be Senna's last ever finish of his career. Little did he know. And in '94, the season didn't start off particularly well. In Brazil, Senna and Schumacher battled for the win when they lapped everyone else. But Senna spun and crashed out, he spun out of the race and couldn't get going again. And it was at Brazil, his home, Interlagos. And Schumacher ended up winning the race. And then in the Pacific, Senna took pole just like he did in Brazil, but again was taken out by a first corner incident by the Ferrari Nicola Larini. And then Imola happened. So on the Friday in practice, Rubens Barrichello suffered a huge crash. And Barrichello was Senna's protege. You know, they both came from a similar background. They were both Brazilian. They both grew up loving racing, etc., etc., etc. And Barrichello's crash briefly rendered him unconscious, and he was potentially going to die. Sid Watkins saved his life, but that wasn't the worst that the weekend would have, as unfortunately Williams and Simtech and everyone else would find out. Because on the Saturday, while qualifying for the race, Roland Ratzenberger, an Austrian rookie, 33-year-old rookie, who was around about the same age as Senna, lost his front wing, basically damaged his front wing, and it got lodged under the car, and he crashed at over 190 miles an hour, 190 miles an hour, give or take. And it was a head-on impact, and a tyre hit him in the head, and he died almost instantly. The TV cameras caught footage of his head turning like that. and staying like that. And I think at that point, everyone knew that he was dead. And Watkins said to Senna, after Senna obviously went to see Ratzenberger's body, that he should retire and take up fishing with him. And Senna said, look, I can't quit racing, I love it too much. But that would be the end of him. And according to his sister, that morning, Senna opened a passage in the Bible which said, the greatest gift God can give you is meeting God himself. And that day, Senna did meet God, because obviously Senna was Catholic. Senna started from pole for the 65th time in his career, obviously what would be his final time in his career, and he led away at the start, but there was a big crash with Pedro Lamy and JJ Leto's Lotus in Benetton, sorry, and there was a safety car that came out, and it was a fucking slow car. And on the restart, Senna led Schumacher, but because the safety car came in at the end of lap 5. But on lap 7, at Tamburello, which was the first corner on the track, Senna's car, it failed. No one knows what happened to this day. He was turning left for Tamburello, which was a very flat out corner, and you didn't really break through it, and he went into the concrete wall. It wasn't the impact that made him lose his life, it was the fact that it was just like Ratzenberger's. A tyre hit him in the head, and it was blunt force trauma that he died of a few hours later in the hospital. And Senna's legacy will never be forgotten. The whole world just stood up, and it was on live TV on the BBC, and there's still footage of it today. Everything exists of what happened there to this day. And the fact that it's been 27 years just shows how time has passed. The halo's been introduced, which stops debris from hitting the driver, and F1 is a lot more safer than it was in 1984. Some drives that I didn't mention include 1988 Monaco, when he took pole from Alain Prost. Now that might not sound extraordinary, but he took pole by 1.5 seconds from Prost. And there was other drives in his career, like 1984 Dallas, when because it was a hot race, he crashed and retired from the race. However, that wasn't his fault, because he said he saw the wall move. When he means he saw the wall move, one lap it was in a certain spot, and then the next it was back or forward a little bit. And he was right, because the concrete slabs had only just been planted. Drivers hitting it caused it to be damaged, and as a result, it moved more closer towards the track. And it's basically like a pen. Basically, you click the pen and it comes out, and then you click it again and it comes. Sorry, when you click a pen it comes in, and then when you click it again it comes out. It was basically like that, except the clicking was basically the driver's impact. And Senna was right with that, and that showed how precise he was with his car, and how just straight up talented the guy was. And he will never be forgotten as one of, if not Formula One's greatest ever driver. A lot of the money he had, a lot of his net worth, went towards charity in Brazil, poor children more specifically, because he himself wasn't the richest kid as a child. And it changed Brazil. The world just, as I said, it stood up and was in shock. The entire country, to a degree, still hasn't recovered from it today. Brazil haven't had a Formula 1 driver full-time in it for over 4 years. And that's probably going to be the case for a few more years at least. And remember when we used to have Gugelmin, Moreno and Senna on the grid? Exactly. Anyway, if you did enjoy the video, like and subscribe.